The Green Prince is about a very unique relationship between a handler and a source. The source being one of the sons of one of the Hamas members, Hamas founding members in the West Bank, and one of its most respected leader, and the handler being an Israeli Shin Bet agent from Israel Internal Security Agency. Well, these two men started as best of enemies, and in the course of action became sort of best of friends, so to speak. What's interesting in the filmmaking process is exactly that, is that it's a process. So in the course of making the film, you discover a lot of things, especially in the course of editing. I'll give you an example. We originally interviewed a lot more peripheral characters. So we had the head of the Shin Bet at the time, we had people related to Hamas and so on, and people were giving a lot of context to the story because the context is political and it's fascinating. In the course of editing, we realized that the actual story that we wanted to tell was the story of this relationship. So anything which was not directly related to the relationship was cut out, and we were left with just two characters. And then the challenge became how to make a gripping, thriller-like film with just two characters.
I was going to ask about the format of the film, which is basically the two interviews. Why did you leave all that other stuff out? I guess it opens you to the potential criticism of we're not getting the whole story, or we're not getting the context of the story. You're saying you actually did shoot all that and decided to edit it together in that way.
Well, I believe one has to make hard choices. You know, you have to decide which story you're going to tell. And this story, this real life story, is so rich, is so incredible, that you could tell it from many different angles. The angle that we chose was the angle of the relationship. I personally, you know, when I read Mosab's book, which was a bestseller, I was, first of all, I read it in 2 hours, and I'm very much taken by his unique perspective on Hamas and his incredible, unique point of view. But then I was introduced to Gonen as Shin Bet handler, and when I understood the nature of their relationship today, I was covered with goosebumps, because I realized that, you know, if these best of enemies could have become best of friends, so to speak, then many things are possible. So what touched me personally was the relationship. In turn, I wanted to convey or to channel the story of this relationship to the audience. So we made, you know, hard choices in the editing room that were telling the story of a relationship. And if people are interested in the context, they're more than welcome to go and inform themselves and educate themselves about the context. You know, I think what's interesting in films is that if films open a new world to you, and this world is interesting to you, then you will be, motivated to go and research that world for yourself and find out more. You know, what's interesting with The Green Prince is that, you know, a lot of people put their heart and soul into the making of this film. There's about 150 people worked on this film, and people worked day and night. Now, what happens as a result is that when people put their heart and soul into the making of something, then you have a chance of the whole being much greater than the sum of its parts. And what's interesting with The Green Prince is that, you know, different culture and different people perceive different things in the film. So what was very interesting is that I remember, you know, we screened it at Sundance in America, where, you know, people really responded to the hope that this friendship generates. And there were Q&As where people were crying, literally. And then the film screened in Moscow at the International Film Festival, and, you know, the screenings were packed, and people responded tremendously to the film. And there, in Russia, they responded to the fact that these two gentlemen went against their respective systems. So the individual follows his or her own moral compass, does what they believe is right, and they go against the flow, against the system, to which the Russians responded very strongly. In Israel, the film, you know, had an extraordinary reception. It was embraced by both the right and the left side of the political wing. So each one sees a different thing in this film, which is very interesting. I'm very curious to see what Australian audiences will find in this film.
What are the similarities between making a documentary and making a feature film? I think the general perception is that they're two different schools. In fact, they're very similar, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, for me personally, it's all about storytelling. So in essence, if you're a documentary filmmaker or a fiction filmmaker, you're telling a story. I think what's very interesting in documentary filmmaking today is that everything is possible. So if you call documentary a genre of storytelling or filmmaking, and you look at films such as, Searching for Sugar Man, The Imposter, Project Nim, Bombay Beach, The Act of Killing, they're all documentaries, but they're all very different from one another in their form of storytelling. And then you have the films of Werner Herzog, the films of Errol Morris. These are all documentaries, but they're all stories told in very different ways. So the plasticity, so to speak, of documentary filmmaking allows you to do extraordinary things in the world of film today. Fiction is much more rigid in that sense.
Can films like this make any difference?
I was surprised. I didn't believe that films can make a difference, but I'm very much surprised to sort of see that they can, and it's extraordinary. I'll give you an example. First of all, the other day in Sydney, there was a Q&A. It was a gentleman who seemed to be, the gentleman was asking a question, and he seems to be a bit biased against Palestinians. And somehow he reported after seeing the film, his mind had opened up to a lot more possibilities of dialogues with the Palestinians. There you go. It made a difference in the perception of this gentleman. I remember when we screened in Israel, where the film was extremely well received, I got emails from people who were very highly placed in the Israeli security apparatus, saying that in the most absurd of ways, the film made them believe in the possibility of peace with our neighbors. There you go. It made a difference. One of our protagonists, Gonen, he was a persona non grata in the Shin Bet. And because of the film, he was thrust into the mainstream. And he's today viewed as somewhat of a hero in Israel. And it's extraordinary. People want to hear what he has to say. He is the go-to person in Israeli media in some ways when it comes to these matters. So he was, from being a persona non grata, he was thrust into the mainstream, into the limelight. So there was a redemptive effect to telling your story on film. It's very interesting. So, it does make a difference in a way.
Do you intend it to make a difference?
I wouldn't say so. No, I was deeply touched by the story, and my intention was to sort of tell the story as I had perceived it. So that was my only intention.
Are you going to see peace in your lifetime?
Where? In the Middle East, you mean?
Yes.
It's possible. Listen, I think people often ask me, if there's a political message to this film. And for me, the film is a very human film. It's about humans meeting. And what's interesting is that you see that the relationship between these two best of enemies was made possible because they each took the risk to trust one another. And it's a great risk. I mean, the context of the story was, they each risked their lives in trusting one another. But as a result of taking this risk to trust the other, they formed this relationship. And I think that if we see a certain form of risk-taking on the political level, then maybe. Well, in the process of research, of talking to a lot of Shin Bet agents and the former heads of the Shin Bet, we discovered a lot of these techniques. And one aspect of this which was sort of mind-blowing to me is that I recall very well when we finished the first interviews with Gonen, and we shot them in Munich in Bavaria Studios. And at the end of the interviews, the interviews went on for about 9 days, 10 hours a day, so they were very much like an interrogation. And Gonen came to me, the Shin Bet handler, and he said, well, Nadav, this is the first time that I feel that I've been handled. And then you realize the similarities between the job of a handler and of a film director, because in essence, the bond of trust with your subject, your protagonist, or the actor is essential, because you're going to lead them to very emotional realms of the narrative. So you need that bond of trust. And once that bond of trust is created, they trust you to lead them deeper and deeper into the narrative. Now, this is one aspect of the things. Also, when you see The Green Prince, certain aspects of the story, there's that scene where they wanted to make Mosab appear like a wanted man. So they faked this huge operation, this huge arrest operation, sending special forces, pretending to arrest him. They even bombed the house of his family, all to create an artifice, It's a mise en scène, exactly like a film director would do. So it's really very interesting, the similarities between film directors and handler.
Could you describe to us this set that you had built for these interviews? You don't often hear about documentary filmmakers constructing sets specifically to conduct interviews in. Tell us about the set that you built to interview these two gentlemen.
Well, it goes in line to what you mentioned before about them being isolated. So the directive to the production designer, Renata Oster, who was a very gifted production designer, was to build a room which is reminiscent of an interrogation room without really being one. And I wanted this gray concrete because the wall of separation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority is made of huge concrete slabs. So the set is both a reminder of an interrogation room, and there's these gray concrete slabs which are a sort of allusion to the wall which divides the Israelis and the Palestinians. But principally, and this you don't really see in the film, but it was part of the mise en situation, as they say, is that the walls are 5 meters high. So when you're sitting in a set which is made of concrete walls, beton walls, and they're 5 meters high, it's very intimidating. And these two gentlemen are sort of masters of deceit in the good sense of the word, because they lived through layers and layers of lies and deceit in their professional lives. So our role as filmmakers was sort of to, in a friendly way, throw them off their game and create a platform for them to be able to invest emotionally into their narrative. So the set was part of this, the way we shot the film using this Interrotron, which was invented by Errol Morris, and we used this device as sort of a lie detector, because I believe that when one communicates, words are about 30% of the communication. The body language, the energy that you put into it is the rest. So the fact that they're now looking straight into the eyes of the audience allows the audience to sort of turn on their bullshit radar and gouge for themselves the truth of the matters. So they convey meaning through words, but all through the eyes and the body language. It was a very interesting process.